Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As you are all aware, Pangea-Risk has an insight platform that holds our proprietary global risk scoring system, and this enables members to assess and compare country-level macro, political, economic, and security risks with one-year forecasts. We're very excited to announce that our platform now covers 100 countries. But that's not all we look at. We also include election-based outlooks for the geographies that we cover. And on our website, you're able to access our vulnerability assessment when it comes to election-based outlooks. And elections is very much the topic of today. Last year had drawn global attention as the biggest election year in history, with dozens of countries heading to the polls. But 2025 has also delivered some interesting ballot results, and October is shaping up to be a particularly important month on the African continent, with high-stake ballots in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Tanzania. Now, these elections won't just shape political trajectories, they will also have real commercial and investment implications. So to help us unpack these risks and, of course, opportunities associated with these upcoming votes, I'm joined today by Pangea-Risk CEO Robert Besseling and by Jack Brodsky from our Africa analysis team. A warm welcome to you both, and Jack in particular as being our newest member of the Africa analysis team. Great to have you on board, and welcome to you both.
Hi, Gabby. Hi, Jack.
Hi, both. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's great to be here.
So let's dive straight in. Robert, I wanted to start with you. As you and I both know, we have seen a lot of client interest in the election in Cameroon, not necessarily because of our clients anticipating a surprising outcome, but more so around the process and the impact of this election. So from Pangea's perspective, what is your view on the process and the likely outcome of Cameroon's election?
Hello, Gabby. A very well-timed topic, I think, because by the time this webinar goes live, goes broadcast, we're just a few days away from Cameroon's election to kick off the elections in October. And to be honest, it's a bit of a foregone conclusion for all the big three elections in October. It's not about the outcome. It's about the process and the impact. And for Cameroon, just like the other big elections, the main opposition parties have been excluded. In fact, the main presidential candidate of the last election has been disqualified and has not endorsed any of the major opposition candidates. That's Maurice Kamto of one of the major opposition parties. So that means that President Paul Biya is undoubtedly going to win yet another consecutive term. And even though that brings a level of policy certainty to investors, it does mean that a lot of the opposition parties and the younger people in the country will be upset. In particular, Gabby, we're concerned that in the context of Gen Z or youth demonstrations around the world, we will see more unrest in Cameroon, particularly in the Anglophone Western regions or in the far north. Paul Biya is 92 years old. Did you know what the median age in Cameroon is 18? So that really puts into perspective the contradiction between the leadership and the population in Cameroon. And that's what we're worried about at the moment in terms of the process of this election.
Thank you. I think you raised a really interesting point there around the potential disconnect between the electorate and the leadership. But let's look beyond the election itself. Let's take a medium-term outlook for Cameroon. What are we anticipating? And perhaps what are some of the key challenges the next government is going to face?
Thanks, Gabby. I think, first of all, for that question, we have to ignore that there is still no succession strategy in place for Paul Biya. Again, he's 92 and has centralized all power. So let's not speculate at this stage about succession scenarios, but let's, as you say, in the medium term, what is on the cards for Cameroon past this election? And one of the main concerns that we are flagging to our clients at Pangea-Risk is that the country is no longer able to access affordable domestic debt markets to fund its budget. as oil and gas production and revenues start to shrink, and they are certainly forecast to shrink already from this year onwards, the government is increasingly tapping into external debt markets. That's going off trend from other regional Western and Central African markets, which are trying to tap into more domestic bonds. The problem with this is that on the domestic side, we are seeing more non-payment risks, whereas on the external side, that's really where Cameroon is trying to entice investors into its local bond issuance. So that post the election is certainly a concern, and that's exactly what we're showing on our Inside platform risk ratings profile as well. The country is well beyond the sub-Saharan African average, and risks have increased over the past year, in particular on the political instability and currency inconvertibility and non-payment risks. Now, past the election, Gabby, we expect some of these risks to go back to where they were a year ago, but it will still be, Cameroon's risk outlook will still be significantly higher than sub-Saharan African, the averages.
Thank you. I want to move away from Cameroon briefly and turn to another election that's happening on the west coast. And it's definitely a jurisdiction that I've seen on the advisory side of Pangea-Risk get a lot of attention from clients, and that is Côte d'Ivoire. Many people expect the outcome to be, well, shall we say, almost certain. And that certainly shifts the attention from an election-based outlook to questions around longer-term stability in the country. Firstly, do you agree with that assessment? Is this an almost certain outcome?
Thank you, Gabby. Ivory Coast does seem like a certain outcome, but at the same time, that does not explain the amount of client interest we have seen, both on the advisory side, but also on the Inside platform side. A lot of interest in this election because there are very high stakes. Again, the opposition has been included. The incumbent, Alassane Ouattara, is undoubtedly going to win a fourth consecutive term. And that does raise the risk of civil unrest, particularly again by younger urbanized populations, which have not benefited from the very fast economic growth in that country. Well over 6% GDP annual growth rates for Ivory Coast for the next few years. But past these elections, we're expecting that policy certainty, contract risks will be mitigated, and civil unrest will essentially subside in a few weeks afterwards. The only scenario where we could see a surprise is that security forces are focusing on containing unrest. They may be distracted from the ongoing insurgency in the Sahel region. So we could see surprise attacks from the northern border into Ivorian territory. And we already saw a number of these attacks in August. And this is certainly what we are trying to map out to our clients at the moment in terms of surprise incidents at the time of these elections.
Very interesting. Now, assuming the result is as widely expected, how do you see Ivory Coast moving forward beyond this 10 cycle? You mentioned a couple of the factors we may have at front of mind there, but what should investors be keeping in mind in post-election Côte d'Ivoire?
Well, I think the good news here is that the outlook beyond the elections in Ivory Coast is significantly more positive than in Cameroon. Oil and gas revenues are increasing on the back of rising production and increased investment into long-term prospects. We are seeing a strong upcoming cocoa harvest, which is a key export cash crop. And at the same time, more and more investment going into critical mineral mining in Ivory Coast. And similarly, we're seeing more of a consumer-driven economy, more diversified and investment into tertiary sectors. That's all good news for an economy that is set to grow above 6% for the foreseeable future, inflation rates coming down, and even on the back of a number of debt restructuring agreements, we are seeing a sound debt management, the benefits of sound debt management emerge. Now, Gabby, and that is really also reflecting on our risk rating on the Inside platform. The country has seen increases in most of its risk perils over the past year, But beyond these elections, in other words, probably from November, December onwards, we're expecting that these risk scores will start to drop back to where they were essentially a year ago, or even better. So potentially for Ivory Coast, some better news than Cameroon, and we'll look forward to continuing to advise our clients on these key elections in October.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. I'm going to turn to you now, Jack. Let's bring you in. As we know, on the other side of the continent, Tanzania is also heading to the polls this month. What is your outlook on the risks around this ballot, and where do you see the main pressure points emerging?
Thank you, Gabby. Yes, the Tanzanian general election is scheduled for month end, with the National Electoral Commission reporting that 37 million voters have registered to cast their ballots on the 29th of October. The ruling party, the Chama cha Mapinduzi, has won all contests since Tanzania became a multi-party democracy in 1995 and is strongly expected to retain its ruling mandate this time around. However, the election does represent a first for incumbent Samia Suluhu Hassan, who entered office following the death of former President John Magufuli in March 2021. During the electoral process, no serious challenger to Hassan's premiership has emerged. The main opposition party, Chadema, was disqualified in April for refusing to sign an electoral code of conduct. Similarly, the Alliance for Change and Transparency, the country's third largest party, had its favoured candidate, Luhaga Mpina, barred from running for failing to adhere to the country's nomination requirements. However, we do not expect these developments to cause major civic unrest at the polls. While isolated incidents of protest or violence should not be discounted, state security forces will likely preempt or disperse major demonstrations as they did in 2020. Looking ahead, the dominance of Hassan's administration should mean continued economic stability for Tanzania. As the data shows, since Hassan entered office, investment sentiment in the country has risen. The value of registered investment projects has increased from $3.88 billion in 2021 to $9.3 billion in 2024. And given that the Chama cha Mapinduzi currently holds 365 of the 393 seats in parliament, any similar majority would enable the party to push its policies through the National Assembly without delay. The recent $1.4 billion deal between Tanzania, Zambia, and China to upgrade the Tazara Railway is indicative of Hassan's strategy to boost investment in the country's infrastructure. And alongside infrastructure, the government remains in negotiations with Equinor and Shell on a $42 billion liquefied natural gas project, which would develop and export the country's natural gas reserves from a plant in Lindi on the southern coast.
Well, thank you for those insights, and I can certainly say I've seen a lot of excitement around the Tazara Railway infrastructure project. It's certainly forming a lot of our conversations on the advisory side as well. Well, thank you both, Robert and Jack. Thank you so much for your insights. And of course, thanks to everyone listening for joining in. As we've heard, I think it's fair to say that elections in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Tanzania will have wide-reaching implications, both politically but commercially as well. And at Pangea-Risk, we'll be following these developments closely, providing the forward-looking analysis our clients need to guide strategy and decision-making. Until next time, thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Robert.